Emma Rodriguez, a 28-year-old single mother from Queens, takes a secretary position at Blackstone Industries, one of Manhattan's most ruthless corporate empires. She desperately needs the job to support her 8-year-old daughter, Sophia, after losing her previous position. What she doesn't know is that she'll be working directly for Alexander Blackstone, a CEO notorious for destroying careers and making grown executives cry. Known throughout the corporate world as the Executioner, Alexander has gone through 47 secretaries in 2 years. Everyone warns Emma to quit before she even starts, but financial desperation keeps her there. In their first encounter, instead of cowering like everyone else, Emma stands her ground with a combination of professionalism and unexpected humanity that catches Alexander completely off guard. What follows is a story of two damaged souls finding an unlikely connection that transforms not just their professional relationship, but their entire understanding of power, vulnerability, and what it means to be truly successful. Just before we begin, tell us, what city or country are you watching from? It's always incredible to know how far these stories reach. The elevator doors opened with a soft ding on the 47th floor of the Blackstone Tower, and Emma Rodriguez stepped into what felt like walking directly into a lion's den. The reception area of Blackstone Industries was all marble, steel, and intimidation, exactly the kind of place designed to make people feel small. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the strap of her worn leather bag, the same bag she'd carried through 3 job interviews this week alone. "You must be the new sacrifice," said a woman behind the reception desk, not looking up from her computer screen. Her nameplate read, Jessica Chen, Executive Assistant. "I'm Jessica, been here 4 years, survived 3 different departments. Word of advice, keep your resume updated." Emma forced a smile. "I'm Emma Rodriguez. I start today as Mr. Blackstone's secretary." That made Jessica look up. Her expression shifted from casual indifference to something resembling pity. "Oh, honey, no, you're secretary number 48. The last one lasted exactly 6 days. The one before her, 3 hours. 3 hours. He made her cry so hard she had a panic attack. Security had to escort her out." Jessica leaned forward conspiratorially. "Listen, I like you already, which means you're probably too nice for this place. Alexander Blackstone doesn't just fire people, he destroys them. He finds your weakness and presses until you break." Emma's stomach churned, but she thought about Sophia's worried face that morning, asking if they'd have to move again. "I need this job. They all say that. HR is on speed dial for trauma counseling." Jessica pointed toward a hallway lined with floor-to-ceiling windows. "His office is at the end. Good luck, and I mean that literally." Walking down that hallway felt like a death march. Through the glass walls, Emma could see other employees quickly averting their gazes, as if making eye contact might somehow associate them with her impending doom. The whispers followed her. "Another one. How long you think this time? Poor girl." At the end of the hall stood massive mahogany doors with Alexander Blackstone, Chief Executive Officer, etched in gold letters. Emma took a deep breath, knocked twice, and heard a voice that could have frozen fire. "Come in." The office was enormous, dominated by floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. Behind an imposing desk sat a man who looked like he'd been carved from granite and dressed in a $10,000 suit. Alexander Blackstone didn't look up from his papers. "How you're 12 minutes late," he said, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. Emma checked her phone. 8:48 a.m. "Sir, my start time was 8:45. I'm actually 3 minutes early." Now he looked up. Steel gray eyes assessed her with the intensity of a predator sizing up prey. "I don't care what HR told you. When you work for me, you arrive at 8:30, always. Preparation time isn't optional. It's mandatory." Most people would have apologized immediately. Emma had learned from her previous job that immediate surrender often made bullies worse. "I understand, Mr. Blackstone. However, since today is my first day, and this expectation wasn't communicated during my interview process, I hope you'll allow me this one adjustment period. Tomorrow I'll be here at 8:30. The silence that followed was deafening. Alexander's eyes narrowed as if he couldn't quite believe what he'd just heard. In this office, people didn't negotiate, they cowered. "Adjustment period." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper, which somehow made it more terrifying. Miss Rodriguez, let me explain how this works. I give orders. You follow them. There are no adjustments, no negotiations, and certainly no however statements. Are we clear?" Emma straightened her shoulders. Something about his tone, not just angry, but almost hollow, made her respond differently than she'd planned. We're clear about your expectations going forward, yes. But sir, with respect, effective communication works both ways. If you want me to succeed in this position, I need to understand all requirements up front. Alexander stood up slowly, his 6'3" frame intended to intimidate. He walked around the desk, stopping just close enough to invade her personal space. This was usually the moment his secretaries started crying or ran for the door. Emma didn't move. "You think you're different," he said, studying her face. "You think you can handle me where 47 others couldn't." "I think," Emma said carefully, "that maybe those 47 people weren't given a fair chance to succeed. And I think that's probably not good for you or for Blackstone Industries." Something flickered across Alexander's expression. Surprise, maybe even intrigue. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared. "Fair chance." He let out a laugh that held no humor. "This isn't kindergarten, Miss Rodriguez. This is business at the highest level. Fair is a luxury we can't afford." "Then what happened to the last secretary? The one who lasted 6 days?" Alexander's jaw tightened. "She was incompetent. And the one before that? 3 hours? Also incompetent." Emma nodded slowly. "So in 2 years you've hired 47 incompetent people. That's either incredibly bad luck or maybe the problem isn't entirely with them." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Alexander's eyes went from steel gray to storm cloud dark. This was the moment when he unleashed the fury that had made grown executives wet themselves and seasoned professionals question their career choices. But as he opened his mouth to deliver what should have been a crushing verbal assault, something strange happened. He looked, really looked, at Emma Rodriguez. She wasn't cowering or preparing to run. She wasn't even backing down. She was standing there waiting, as if she genuinely wanted to hear his answer. For the first time in years, Alexander Blackstone found himself at a complete loss for words. To be continued in Chapter 2. The silence stretched between them like a tightrope, and Emma could feel her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd just essentially called one of Manhattan's most powerful CEOs a failure at managing people. Any rational person would have apologized, backtracked, maybe even run. But something in Alexander's eyes, a flicker of something almost vulnerable, kept her planted in place. Alexander walked slowly back to his desk, his movements controlled but tense. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than before, which somehow made it more unsettling. "You want to know what happened to Secretary number 47? Emma nodded. "Sarah Mitchell, 26 years old, MBA from Wharton, stellar references. She lasted 6 days because on day 4, she made the catastrophic mistake of scheduling my conference call with Tokyo during my standing meeting with the board. When I explained that this kind of error could cost us a $40 million deal, she broke down crying and spent the next 2 days making increasingly desperate mistakes trying to prove herself." He sat down, never breaking eye contact. "Secretary number 46 was Marcus Chen. Yes, Jessica's cousin. He lasted 3 hours because he couldn't handle the pressure of managing 17 different time zones, 43 daily phone calls, and a calendar that changes every 15 minutes. He hyperventilated in that very chair." Emma absorbed this information. "So they weren't incompetent, they were overwhelmed. In this position, there's no difference." Alexander's tone turned razor sharp again. "When you're responsible for managing the schedule of a company that employs 12,000 people and generates $2.3 billion in annual revenue, overwhelmed equals incompetent. Overwhelmed equals failure. Overwhelmed equals human," Emma interrupted quietly. Alexander's mouth actually fell open slightly. In 5 years as CEO, no one, absolutely no one, had interrupted him mid-sentence. "They were human," Emma continued, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was doing. "And humans have learning curves. They have adjustment periods. They need support systems to handle impossible expectations." "Impossible?" Alexander's voice rose. "Miss Rodriguez, nothing I do here is impossible. Difficult, yes. Demanding, absolutely. But not impossible." "Then why haven't any of your secretaries succeeded?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Alexander stared at her, and Emma could practically see the wheels turning in his head. She was either the bravest person who'd ever walked into his office or the most foolish. Possibly both. "Because," he said finally, "the people HR sends me are weak." Emma countered. "Because the system is designed to make them fail." Alexander stood up abruptly, his chair rolling backward with the force. "Are you seriously standing in my office on your first day, lecturing me about management?" "No, sir. I'm having a conversation with my new boss about how we can both succeed." Emma's voice remained calm, professional. You clearly need someone who can handle this position long term. I need a job that can support my daughter. It seems like we both have something to gain from making this work." The mention of her daughter seemed to catch Alexander off guard. His expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "You have a child?" "Yes, Sophia, she's 8. "And her father?" Emma's jaw tightened slightly. "Not in the picture." Alexander nodded slowly, processing this information. Something about her straightforwardness, her lack of drama around a clearly painful subject, seemed to intrigue him further. "So you're desperate," he said, but not unkindly. "That's why you're not running." "I prefer the term highly motivated," Emma replied with the ghost of a smile. For the first time since she'd entered his office, Alexander's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Highly motivated people can be dangerous, Miss Rodriguez. They take risks that others won't. Is that what you're afraid of? That I'll take risks?" "I'm not afraid of anything." The response was automatic, practiced, but Emma caught something in his eyes that suggested otherwise. "Then give me a real chance," she said. "Not a setup for failure, but an actual opportunity to succeed. Tell me everything I need to know up front. Give me the tools I need, and if I fail after that, then you'll know it's actually incompetence." Alexander walked to the massive windows overlooking the city, his hands clasped behind his back. The morning sun cast long shadows across his office, and Emma could see the tension in his shoulders, the rigid way he held himself. "You want to know the real reason those 47 secretaries failed?" he said without turning around. "It wasn't the workload. It wasn't the pressure. It wasn't even my so-called management style." Emma waited. "They were afraid of me." His voice was barely above a whisper now. "Terrified, actually. And when people are that afraid, they can't think clearly. They make mistakes. They second-guess themselves. They become exactly what they fear I already think they are: incompetent." Emma felt something shift in the room, as if a wall had developed the tiniest crack. "And what do you think of me right now?" Alexander turned around, studying her face with those intense grey eyes. "I think you're either incredibly brave or completely insane. Maybe both." To Emma's absolute shock, Alexander Blackstone almost smiled. Almost. "Definitely both." He walked back to his desk and pulled out a thick folder. "This is your job description. The real one, not the sanitized version HR gave you. It includes managing my calendar across 6 time zones, coordinating with 14 different department heads, handling confidential communications with board members, and serving as the gatekeeper for approximately 200 people who think they need my immediate attention every day." Emma took the folder, its weight substantial in her hands. "The last secretary to make it past 1 week lasted exactly 9 days, Alexander continued. "Her name was Patricia Williams. She was smart, capable, experienced. She failed because on day 8, I had a particularly brutal board meeting, and I took my frustration out on her when she brought me the wrong coffee order." "What happened to her?" Alexander's expression darkened. "She quit, but not before she told me exactly what she thought of me, my management style, and my chances of ever finding someone willing to put up with my—" He paused, searching for the right words. Her exact phrase was toxic perfectionism, masquerading as professionalism. Emma absorbed this information. Was she right? The question seemed to hit Alexander like a physical blow. For a moment, the mask slipped completely, and Emma saw something raw and vulnerable in his eyes before he quickly composed himself. "That, Miss Rodriguez, is what we're going to find out. To be continued in Chapter 3. If this story is touching you in some way, comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Every place has its own struggles, and sometimes it's incredible to see how we all connect through such human stories." 3 weeks later, Emma had settled into a rhythm that would have killed most people. She arrived at 8:15 every morning, 15 minutes before Alexander's demanded 8:30, and often didn't leave until after 7 p.m. Her desk outside his office had become command central for what felt like running a small country. "Rodriguez, I need the Henderson files, the Tokyo contracts revised, and someone from accounting up here in the next 10 minutes. Alexander's voice crackled through the intercom. "Henderson files are on your desk. Tokyo contracts were revised and sent back this morning, and Jennifer from accounting is in the elevator now," Emma replied calmly, not looking up from her computer where she was simultaneously scheduling his lunch meeting with potential investors and coordinating a conference call with their London office. Alexander's office door opened, and he stepped out looking mildly surprised. In 3 weeks, this had become their pattern. He would demand something, fully expecting it not to be done, and Emma would have already handled it. "The coffee meeting with Morrison Industries," he said, scanning his phone. Move it to Thursday. Emma looked up. Morrison Industries specifically requested Wednesday because their CEO flies back to Chicago Wednesday night. If we move it to Thursday, we lose the meeting entirely. Then reschedule the board review. The board review is for the quarterly reports that are due to shareholders on Friday. If we push that, we miss the SEC deadline. Alexander's jaw tightened, his tell when he was getting frustrated. Then cancel the Morrison meeting. Sir, Emma said carefully, Morrison Industries represents a potential $300 million partnership. Maybe we could. I said cancel it, Alexander snapped, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. This was the moment. Emma had watched this pattern with other employees. Alexander would become overwhelmed, start making irrational decisions, and when someone tried to help, he would lash out. Usually people backed down immediately, but Emma had spent 3 weeks studying him, understanding him, and she'd noticed something others hadn't. Mr. Blackstone, she said, standing up from her desk, can I speak with you privately? Alexander looked at her as if she'd just suggested they burn down the building. Rodriguez, just do what I asked. In your office, please. It'll take 2 minutes. Something in her tone, calm but insistent, made him hesitate. After a moment, he turned and walked back into his office. Emma followed, closing the door behind her. You're spiraling, she said quietly. Alexander whirled around, his eyes flashing dangerously. Excuse me? You're overwhelmed, so you're making decisions based on stress instead of logic. The Morrison meeting is important. The board review can't be moved. But there's a third option you're not seeing because you're too wound up to think clearly. I am not. Your lunch with the Peterson Group, Emma interrupted. It's social, not business. They've been trying to get FaceTime with you for months for networking purposes. Cancel that, move Morrison to the lunch slot, and keep the board review where it is. Alexander stared at her, his mouth slightly open. The solution was simple, logical, and completely obvious, which was exactly why his stressed mind had missed it. He sat down heavily in his chair. You just solved a problem I've been wrestling with for 2 hours. Because I'm not emotionally invested in any of these meetings, Emma said gently. You are. When you care that much about everything, it becomes harder to prioritize. Something shifted in Alexander's expression. He looked at Emma as if seeing her clearly for the first time. Why aren't you afraid of me? The question caught Emma off guard with its vulnerability. Should I be? Everyone else is. Emma studied his face, the tension around his eyes, the way he held his shoulders like he was bracing for an attack, the exhaustion that expensive suits couldn't hide. You want to know what I see when I look at you? She asked. Alexander nodded, almost despite himself. I see someone who cares so much about doing everything perfectly that he's forgotten how to let anyone help him. I see someone who's convinced that if he shows any weakness, everything will fall apart. And I see someone who's incredibly lonely. The last word hung in the air between them like a bridge neither of them expected to cross. Lonely, Alexander repeated quietly. When was the last time someone disagreed with you without being terrified of the consequences? Emma asked. When was the last time someone told you that you were wrong, or offered a different perspective, or just talked to you like a human being instead of like a force of nature? Alexander was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the Manhattan skyline. I can't remember, he admitted finally. That's why your secretaries fail, Emma said softly. It's not because they're incompetent, it's because you've created an environment where everyone's too scared to do their job properly. They're so busy trying not to upset you that they can't think clearly enough to actually help you. Alexander looked at her sharply. And you're not scared? Emma smiled ruefully. Oh, I'm terrified, but I'm more afraid of failing my daughter than I am of you, and that makes me focus on solutions instead of just survival. Something extraordinary happened then. Alexander Blackstone, the man who'd made Fortune 500 CEOs stutter, who'd reduced Ivy League MBAs to tears, who was known throughout Manhattan as the executioner, actually laughed. Not the harsh, humorless sound Emma had heard before, but a real laugh. You know what's funny? He said. In 3 weeks you've prevented more disasters, solved more problems, and saved me more headaches than any assistant I've ever had, and you did it by arguing with me. I prefer to think of it as collaborative problem solving, Emma said with a slight smile. Alexander shook his head, still looking amazed. Patricia Williams, secretary number 46. She said I had toxic perfectionism masquerading as professionalism. I've been thinking about that for months. What conclusion did you reach? That she was probably right. Alexander's admission came quietly, as if the words were difficult to speak. I've been so afraid of failure that I've made failure inevitable. Emma felt something shift between them, a crack in the wall that Alexander had built around himself. What happens now? Alexander looked at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, his smile reached his eyes. Now, Miss Rodriguez, we figure out how to do this job together, instead of in spite of each other. Together? Together. And Emma. He used her first name for the first time. Thank you. To be continued in Chapter 4. 2 months later, the 47th floor of Blackstone Industries felt like a different world entirely. The tension that had once hung in the air like a toxic fog had been replaced by something Emma never thought she'd experience in a corporate environment: actual teamwork. Emma, the Singapore deal just came through, Alexander called from his office, his voice carrying excitement instead of the usual edge. We got everything we asked for. Emma looked up from her desk, where she was coordinating the logistics for their biggest product launch in company history. That's fantastic. I'll get the contracts department to start processing the paperwork and notify the board. Already done, Alexander said, appearing in his doorway with a genuine smile. I handled the board notification myself. Thought you had enough on your plate with the launch event. 6 months ago, Alexander Blackstone wouldn't have considered his secretary's workload when making decisions. The change was so dramatic that other executives had started whispering about what kind of magic Emma Rodriguez had worked. The truth was simpler and more complex than anyone imagined. Emma? Alexander said, settling into one of the chairs across from her desk, something that would have been unthinkable before. Can we talk about tomorrow's presentation? This had become their new routine. Instead of barking orders through the intercom, Alexander would come out and discuss things with her. Instead of demanding the impossible and expecting her to figure it out alone, he would collaborate on solutions. I've been thinking about what you said last week, he continued, about the presentation being too focused on numbers and not enough on the human impact. Emma saved her work and gave him her full attention. What did you decide? You were right. Again. Alexander shook his head with amazement. I restructured the entire thing around the stories of the people our technology is helping. The board is going to get the financial data, but they're also going to understand why this matters. That's going to be powerful, Emma said, meaning it. When you connect the emotional component to the business case, it becomes memorable instead of just informative. Alexander studied her face. How do you do that? Do what? See things I miss. You don't have an MBA. You don't have years of corporate experience, but somehow you understand people in a way that I've never learned. Emma considered the question carefully. Maybe because I've been on the other side. I've been the person affected by corporate decisions. I've been the employee who felt invisible. I've been the single mom trying to balance impossible demands with raising a child. She paused. When you've lived that experience, you see the human cost of everything. Alexander was quiet for a moment. I've been thinking about that a lot lately. About cost? What do you mean? The cost of the way I used to operate. 47 secretaries in 2 years. Hundreds of employees who were afraid to speak up. Good people who left the company because they couldn't handle the environment I created. Alexander's voice carried a weight Emma had never heard before. The cost in innovation we lost because people were too scared to share ideas. The cost in loyalty, in trust, in humanity. Emma felt her heart squeeze. You can't change the past. No, but I can change what happens next. Alexander leaned forward. Emma, I want to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Okay. Do you think I can be different? Not just with you, but with everyone? Or am I too set in my ways? The vulnerability in the question took Emma's breath away. This was the same man who had once been described as having ice water in his veins, asking if he was capable of change. I think, Emma said carefully, that you've already started changing. The question is whether you want to keep going. Alexander nodded slowly. I do, but I don't know how to do it without you. The words hung between them, loaded with meaning that went beyond professional boundaries. Alexander, Emma said softly, using his first name naturally now, you don't need me to be a better leader. You need to remember that the person who can see solutions when you're spiraling, who can tell you the truth even when it's difficult, that person was always inside you. You just forgot how to access him because you were so focused on being invulnerable. What if I mess up? What if I revert back to the way I was? Emma smiled. Then I'll remind you who you're capable of being. That's what partners do. Partners. We're a team, aren't we? Emma asked. You handle the big picture strategy. I handle the details and logistics, and together we make sure nothing falls through the cracks. But more than that, I keep you grounded, and you challenge me to think bigger. That's partnership. Alexander was quiet for a long time. staring out at the Manhattan skyline that had witnessed so much of his transformation. "Emma," he said finally, "I need to tell you something." Her heart skipped. "What?" "When you first walked into my office, I was planning to make you quit by the end of the day. I had a whole strategy worked out. Impossible tasks, unreasonable demands, public humiliation if necessary." Alexander's voice was thick with regret. "I was so convinced that failure was inevitable that I was actively trying to cause it." Emma felt a chill. "What changed your mind?" "You looked me in the eye and saw me," Alexander said simply. "Not the CEO, not the reputation, not the power. You saw a person who was struggling, and instead of running away from it, you decided to help. Nobody had done that for me in, God, maybe ever." Emma felt tears prick her eyes. "Alexander, I know we can't go back and change how this started, but I want you to know that you saved me, not just professionally, but as a person." Alexander's voice was barely above a whisper. "You reminded me that strength isn't about being invulnerable. It's about being brave enough to let people see who you really are. And now that you've made it this far, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? Your presence matters, and your story does too." 6 months later, Alexander Blackstone was featured on the cover of Forbes magazine. The headline read, "The CEO Who Changed Everything: How Alexander Blackstone Transformed His Leadership and His Company." But the quote that ran beneath his photo was the one that mattered most to Emma. "The best leaders aren't the ones who never fall down. They're the ones brave enough to let someone help them back up." Emma Rodriguez had walked into Blackstone Industries expecting to find a job. Instead, she'd found her purpose and helped a broken man remember his humanity. Sometimes the most profound changes happen not in boardrooms or strategy sessions, but in the quiet moments, when two people choose to see the best in each other, even when the world expects the worst.